Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for watching. You may not know it, but this November, judicial elections and retentions are on the ballot in the state of Pennsylvania, and then it's International Credit Union Month. Stay tuned for our special interview with State Treasurer Robin Wiessmann. All of this after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, you may not know it, but 67 jurists are up for these so-called retention elections this year, and scores of county judges will be elected throughout the Commonwealth. There's a move to oust all of the judges who are on the ballot to be retained. Joining me to talk about this and more is Fred Anton. He's the president of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, and Pete DeCoursey. He's the bureau chief of Capitolwire.com, our regular commentators. Gentlemen, welcome.
Glad to be here, Terry.
Well, we're glad to have you. Pete, you're smiling already. You're into this one, aren't you? These retention. Now, come on, explain this to me. First of all, explain what the heck's going on. 67 jurists are going to be retained. Take it from there.
We have 60 county judges and 7 statewide judges who were elected either 10, 20, or 30 years ago.
Right.
And the way our system works here is you get elected once, and then every 10 years you have to be retained. Now, for the first 30 years of that rule in Pennsylvania, almost nobody lost. Every once in a while, somebody get a
county judge might go down now and then.
Might get indicted or
in Pennsylvania, all right, go ahead.
But short of an indictment, you won retention.
Right.
Then in 2005, after the pay raise, Justices Sandra Schultz Newman and Russell Nigro ran for retention because they'd been elected in 1995.
Right.
Newman won by the skin of her chinny chin chin because not only did Governor Tom Ridge, a Republican like Newman, do robocalls for her to loyal Republican voters, Governor Ed Rendell called in the Philadelphia and the suburbs and said, please vote for Newman. So she won narrowly. Nigro didn't think he needed any help. He lost because of the pay raise. Now, after that, they were the only 2 judges up for retention that year on the statewide level. And
now we have 7.
Now we have 7, and we have 60 county judges. Right. And since then, the pay raise was repealed, but then some judges sued to get it back just for themselves, just for judges. They won their case. Right. It was upheld by the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, and now we have a Supreme Court justice, 6 lower state court justices, and 60 county judges facing voters for accountability for the pay raise for the first time.
Let me just add to what to the background on this whole situation. Retention elections are to keep the judges in office unless they've done something that has been inappropriate or unless they've misbehaved themselves. There's sort of a presumption, if nothing is notable, that they should be retained. Now, that presumption has been more or less ratified by the voters, because if you look over all the retention elections, you will find the average, unless there is an issue pointed out by the press or by the public, there is
even when there is
70
judges who've been indisciplined, judges who've been embarrassed, judges who've had messy divorces, they all get retained.
They get retained by a vote. This is very important. Now, this is very important. 70 to 30. Now, Ron Castile, when he was up for retention quite recently,
Supreme Court Justice
was retained 80-20, and before the pay raise, and he spent. You know how much he spent on his reelection? Absolutely zero. Not one dime. Now, let me say this. I want to get on the record right here. These judges will all be retained. And
now, hold on now. There's a movement afoot to not retain them by Operation Clean Sweep and some other reform groups.
And everybody laughed at those guys and said that no judges would lose last time, and Russell Nigro to this day still walks around the streets of Philadelphia going, what happened?
What happened? Go ahead,
and
Fred.
Let me say this.
You don't need me here today. You guys just keep talking. Go ahead.
The defeat of Russell Nigro, which was a grave injustice, because Russell Nigro, on the standards that I would set forth for retention of appellate judges, which is a reading and evaluation of their opinions. Appellate court justices do only one thing. They vote and decide cases that are before the court, and they write opinions.
Pete,
but the point of having elections is that the people get to decide what's important, not the pointy heads like me or the captains of industry like Fred. Now, the voters get to decide. Got to decide that Mike Vion's career wasn't worth the pay raise.
He's
the voters got to
House
decide
member who got voted out.
That the top state Senate leaders' careers weren't worth the pay raise. They get to decide. It's their power.
Hold on, go ahead, Fred.
On Judge Nigro and Newman had absolutely nothing to do with their records as judges of the Supreme Court. It had everything to do with the backlash, inappropriate backlash created by these groups. These groups aren't getting any traction whatever with the voters.
This year compared to
none.
All right,
I'd like to quote Terry's own poll. More voters are inclined to vote against a judge than for a judge, and that's like 21 or 20 to 18.
All right, so we got to go to break, but let me ask you this.
And that's more people
Fred,
than a vote.
you say you don't think
not one single judge will be...
I'll put you on the spot, Peter. You don't mind getting there. Go ahead. Some will get taken out?
I think some will not be retained. I think the most interesting case is Supreme Court Justice Tom Saylor, who actually voted against the decision to keep the pay raise.
We're going to break. We're going to come back and do another... they don't need me on this program. Great discussion. We'll be back. Some of the judges at the appeals court level need to be elected. We want to talk about the election, particularly the Supreme Court elections, when we come back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Pennsylvania Medical Society. Doctors and patients, preserve the relationship. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're talking with Fred Anton and Pete DeCoursey about judicial retention elections. Now we're going to chat about judicial elections. Peter, let me start with you. Five judges are up for election this year.
Yep.
2 in the Supreme Court, 3 on the Superior Court. Talk a little bit about the Supreme Court elections for our viewers.
Okay, the Republicans are Maureen Lally Green and Mike Krancer. Maureen Lally Green is a Superior Court judge from Pittsburgh. Mike Krancer is the grandson of Walter Annenberg, one of the most famous rich people in the history of the state.
So he won't have any trouble raising money. Is that what you're saying?
But so far we haven't seen much money from either. And frankly, we've seen almost no raise from them or from the Democrats. Deborah Todd, a Superior Court judge from Allegheny, or Seamus McCaffrey, a Superior Court judge from Philadelphia, with the famous Eagles Court judge who used to hand out sentences in the bottom of the Veterans Stadium to people who've been drunk at Eagles games.
Let me turn quickly to you. These are tough. I mean, you're a lawyer. You've been through. You've followed these elections very closely over the years. Running for judge statewide, or in this case, justice. How hard is this?
That's the biggest argument for a merit election or some other election by the voters. Now, what I said about retention applies to 3 of these 4 candidates for the Superior Court, for the Supreme Court. They have a body of work. They have opinions.
But the voters aren't going to read these opinions,
but somebody ought to be reading these.
The Bar Association,
The Bar Association ought to be reading these opinions.
Peter?
Yes, people ought to be reading these opinions. Now, there's an article in the Patriot today that said the Patriot looked at Judge Saylor's opinions and found them scholarly, found them well-reasoned. There's just apathy on the part of voters. And the most significant thing that has been said here is that McCaffrey has been the Eagles judge. He's going to get more votes as a result of that than any of the others are going
to pick our judges.
Well, no, it isn't.
But also, they're not really running a campaign. If you look, even
why? In the past, they've had $1 million. Hold on, they've had $1 million Supreme Court races. You've written about them.
Right.
Go ahead.
And in those races, justices like Tom Saylor picked out an issue. Now, Justice Tom Saylor ran against Joe Del Sol on the issue that Fred loves. Trial lawyers are bad, and Del Sol is too close to the trial lawyers. Was a lot of that campaign.
Is he right? You got to have an issue that.
And
you
right
take
now,
to
there's
the voters?
no campaign, there's no fundraising, because the retention election for Saylor has sucked out the money. The money's going to Saylor, and not to the Democrats or the Republicans running for Supreme Court.
That's correct. The money is all going to Saylor, and yes, they must get a high profile. They don't need Look at Papadakis when he won sometimes back. He had deferred mortgages or made some decision that got attention. They've got to do something to get a lot of attention. That's why I'm against Joan Norrie Melvin. Joan Norrie Melvin is getting attention by saying she won't accept a pay raise. That's not responsible as far as I'm concerned.
All right, we have 2 minutes maybe left. Peter, down in the Philadelphia suburbs, there's some important elections. County offices, what usually happens there stays there. This time there are huge statewide implications for these county elections.
It used to be that the southeast counties, the 4 southeast counties around Philadelphia, were reliably Republican.
Absolutely.
Now they've been trending Democrat, but the idea used to be, well, at least for county commissioner, we'll stay Republican and we'll vote Republican. Now there's a very good chance that the counties of Schuylkill and Montgomery could go from being long time in Republican control to being 2 out of 3 Democratic commissioners, and there's some chance in Bucks, Chester, and Delco. And Delco, there's no chance of change of control.
They get one member on the county council, right?
For the first time in history.
Yeah.
And in all of these counties, these are counties that Tom Ridge won handily. These are counties Dick Thornburg won.
And so did Ed Rendell.
But these are counties that Republicans used to count on.
Yeah.
And now, if they go at the courthouse level, they may be part of a real realignment. And in the West, Republicans may win too, Westmoreland and Washington, which will continue the Republican realignment in the West.
Yeah, this realignment's going on for... Fred, you live in the southeast. Talk about that.
All those counties in the southeast, if there's more than a 30% turnout, will go Democratic.
Right.
They've all gone Democratic in the presidential election since 1992. They've all gone Democratic. The registration has changed dramatically in those counties from majority Republican to even Republican and Democrat, and a big independent registration.
I'm not sure I agree. Jim Matthews could pull it out in Montgomery just because he's personable.
We know whose brother he has, Chris Matthews.
Coming up next.
Final word. All right, when we come back, International Credit Union Month, State Treasurer Robin Wiessmann, stay with us. We'll be back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program for our financial literacy update. It's International Credit Union Month, and joining me is Mike Wishnow, as often is the case. He's a Senior Vice President with the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association, and for her first appearance on Pennsylvania Newsmakers, Robin Wiessmann, the State Treasurer. Robin, let me just go and say something. That's Treasurer Wiessmann, I will call you. Bob Casey, your predecessor, was on this show all the time. You're welcome anytime.
Well, thank you.
So
I'm looking forward to it.
And you're going to come back, and we're going to get into some of the things you're working on. We'd love to have you on. You're welcome to come on this program anytime you want to chat about what you're doing. All right, Michael, let's go to you. This Credit Union Better Choice program, what's it all about?
Oh, what it is, Terry, essentially is an alternative to payday lending. And it is a more affordable alternative to payday lending that takes folks who are living paycheck to paycheck, gives them a more affordable opportunity to borrow money, and moves them into the mainstream financial system by giving them a little bit of savings and also a little bit of financial education.
Right. Now, let's turn to you. Why the State Treasurer has some interest in this as an office? I mean, why? Why do you care about this program?
Well, I view the State Treasury as really the state's bank. And as a fiduciary with the Treasury, we have a large responsibility not just to the state government itself, where we operate as the bank, but I think to all of the residents of Pennsylvania. And I think the terms on which they do their banking is very relevant to the state treasury.
Yeah. So we end up, I mean, one of the concerns, I mean, there are a whole bunch of concerns about payday lending. We've actually done some programs on this over the past year as it's become a pretty big issue. One is you've got people who borrow money who shouldn't borrow money. One, you've got some lenders who get into the business of lending a lot of money to people that they shouldn't be lending to. Do you have a kind of a general philosophy about that?
Well, I don't think about it so much as people who shouldn't be borrowing, but perhaps people who need to borrow. Yeah. So I view it as a service, really, to try and make the day-to-day existence in terms of the working class who really needs some financial resources. I view it as a service.
Yeah. Maybe I should have qualified that and said that I think that, I mean, obviously there are people who unfortunately live paycheck to paycheck, and if something gets delayed, they need to go borrow money.
Right.
And I guess my point was that sometimes there are predatory lenders. Not everybody, and you know, the credit unions and the banks in this state are all basically pretty good, but there are predatory lenders who will lend people more money than they should.
I see what you're saying.
think that was the point I was making.
And I do think that, you know, we operate in a free market. I mean, and to the extent that there's a market, they're going to try and fill it. But I think that a lot of the individuals who are doing this really do need better alternatives. Yeah. So I'm not going to, my view is on the payday lending industry exists. And to the extent that we can provide a better market alternative for them, so that we can ameliorate, you know, the usurious loans that are out there, then that's something we probably should do.
Yeah, Mike, one of the concerns, I mean, the treasurer really makes a good point. I mean, you're out in the marketplace. I mean, you're in the marketplace competing, you know, credit unions and banks compete all the time with other financial institutions. What are some of the guidelines that lenders, and you and I have chatted about this before, you've got these folks who are trying to borrow money. I mean, what should they be looking out for?
Well, certainly the welfare of the borrower. Yeah. And in my opinion, and I think that the treasurer probably shares this opinion, although I don't want to speak for her, there are essentially two systems out there. There is a mainstream system, which, as you say, Terry, is banks, credit unions, financial planners, and folks that are helping people to build wealth. Yeah. And then there's a whole other system of folks stripping wealth. Right. And that would include your payday lenders, your check cashers, your pawnbrokers, rent-to-own companies. These are folks that are touching consumers, many of whom are on the working class end of the spectrum, and taking their money. And they're paying more for services than, frankly, they need to. Yeah. And that's why this public-private partnership to give a market alternative, as the treasurer said, is so important.
Yeah, we're going to take a break. I want to talk a little bit more about sort of the payday lending trap that I think a lot of folks get into, and whether or not we need more regulation, or, as the treasurer points out, maybe some regulation and some competition, you know, better competition, choices for people so that they don't fall into that, but also a little more about how this program functions. We'll do that after these words. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Penn Future, where we believe that every environmental victory grows the economy, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers with State Treasurer Robin Wiessmann and Michael Wishnow from the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Treasurer, let me ask you this question. You know, there's this debate about regulation versus outlawing. Obviously, this is a field that's not very much regulated. What are your sort of thoughts about the whole business of regulation?
Well, I am an investment banker, and I'm a maven in the financial markets, so I, of course, like free trade.
Right.
However, as with anything else, we have to balance the interests of consumers who maybe taken advantage of with the free market. And it seems that payday lending, because it is so unregulated, and there are so many, there is so much of it, that it is something that we have to look at very carefully in terms of regulating it. As I mentioned before, I really think making sure people are aware of the market alternatives and trying to increase that market is is one of the vehicles to address the issue.
Michael, when we talk about this Better Choice program that you all have going on, and how would that provide an alternative to some of these other lenders that we've chatted about?
Well, first of all, in addition to being an alternative, it's really designed to move consumers from an economy where they're being stripped of their wealth into the mainstream financial system, and that's a good thing. The Better Choice program itself is considerably less expensive payday loan. That's the base of the program.
Right.
And the Treasurer's Office has been kind enough to support that from the beginning.
Right.
But that's just a small part of it. In addition, there's a savings component where they're required to save money, perhaps for the first time in their lives.
So in other words,
there's an education component.
Yeah, I mean, over the years, we've talked about this education and how important it is. I'm reluctant to suggest we put something else into the schools, but this is pretty important stuff, and somewhere, young folks need to be taught about money management and credit. Michael and his colleagues have come on here now for a couple of years talking about that. Now, you're, as you say, an investment banker. How important do you think all that is? I mean, to start earlier than we do, to get young folks aware so they don't fall into these payday lending traps, and so they understand money management, something you probably know more about than all of us put together.
Well, it's interesting you say that. Obviously, I think it's extremely important. I have 2 children myself.
Yeah.
I gave a tutorial for my son's Cub Scout troop, from when they were very, very young. I think it's important, and it's actually something I'm working on in terms of developing that for throughout the Commonwealth. We need all the resources we can, the Department of Banking, the credit unions, the Treasurer's Office, any way we can to have children understand the value of saving and the compounding effect of the savings that they have. It's critical, and obviously we know it's a national issue.
All right, well, thanks for coming in. You're going to come back hopefully in a couple of weeks and chat about some of the initiatives that you're working on, Michael. It's always great to see you. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.